It's January 5th, 1998 and 7 a.m. in Seoul, South Korea. It's freezing, but people are waiting in line around the block. They're not waiting to withdraw their money, they're waiting to give it away. A grandmother opens a small cloth pouch. Inside, a gold ring. The kind that Korean families give their children on their first birthday. She has kept this ring for 40 years. She places it on the counter, signs a form, and walks out. By the end of that day, 500,000 Koreans had done the same thing. Wedding rings, an Olympic gold medal, a Cardinal's gold cross. People gave it away. Over 4 months, 3.5 million Koreans took part in this gold collecting drive. That's 1 in 4 households in the entire country. Why did they do it? And more importantly, would we? To answer that, you need to go back. Through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, South Korea went from a country destroyed by war to being the 11th largest economy in the world in just 30 years. It was built on cheap labor, big exports, and giant family-owned businesses called chaebols. You know the names: Samsung, LG, Daewoo, Hyundai. They bet big and they borrowed a lot. This period was called the Miracle on the Han River. In 1996, South Korea joined the OECD. This miracle looked permanent. Now you already know that the story doesn't end well, but here's what you might not know. The same disease that almost took South Korea down, India has a version of that right now. In 1997, 4 of Korea's largest companies collapsed in just 6 months. It started with Hanbo Steel, then Sammy Steel, then the Jinro Group, and then Kia, the country's 8th largest company, defaulted on over $370 million in payments. Every one of these companies died the same way. They had borrowed lots of money that they were supposed to pay back quickly, and they funded projects that would only pay off years later. So when the Asian financial crisis finally hit, foreign investors pulled their money out, and companies in South Korea had nothing to pay them back with. By November, Korea's foreign exchange reserves were almost empty. They called the IMF. The IMF gave them a $58 billion bailout. This was the largest in history at that point. That public humiliation is the biggest reason 3.5 million Koreans lined up in the cold weeks later. But here's what people don't tell you about this story. Economically, the gold collecting campaign didn't do much. The total gold that they collected was about 227 tons, which is a lot, but it amounts to about $2.1 billion. South Korea's total debt was $157 billion. So the gold amounted to about just over 1% of the total debt. And here's the other thing. The citizens weren't really giving their gold away or donating it. The government paid them market price for it. So on paper, this wasn't a sacrifice. This was a transaction. But look at what they were actually trading. On one side, they had gold, a stable asset that was about to have a major rally over the next 10 years. On the other side, they had the Korean won, a currency that had just depreciated to half its value in a matter of weeks. A currency that nobody in the world wanted to hold. They were handing over something that held its value in exchange for something that was actively collapsing. And still, 3.5 million people did it anyway. That is the true meaning of collectivism. They understood something simple. Value is not in the object, but rather in the people that choose to honor it. A falling currency in a country that survives is still more valuable than gold in a collapsed country. So if gold didn't really save Korea, what did? The campaign was a signal to the IMF, to investors, and to all the countries watching from the sidelines to see if this country has what it takes to fix itself. 3.5 million ordinary people lining up in the cold to give away their family's gold answered that question louder than any government press release ever could. And then, Korea did something even more difficult. They let companies fail. Daewoo, one of the country's biggest chaebols, went bankrupt in 1999. Hyundai had to split up into many small entities, and Samsung pivoted entirely into semiconductors. In 1998, Korea's GDP shrunk by 7%, and their unemployment almost tripled. A poem written by a second-grade girl made the national newspapers. It was about her father. He came home every night, very late, and was too tired to wake up in the morning. She wrote, "Morning sun coming up, but my dad cannot get up." And then, in 1999, the economy grew 11%. By August 2001, Korea had paid every cent of its IMF debt, 3 years ahead of schedule. The Korea you know today, Samsung, Hyundai, Parasite winning the Oscar, K-pop going global, all of that was built after 1998. It was built on rubble. So here's my question. Would we have done it? Would Indians have stood in line to give away their gold? Probably not. So South Korea in 1998 was built on one belief, that when the country is in danger, everyone moves together to protect it. This belief was built over centuries of invasions, colonial rule, and war. But India is different. Our loyalty operates at the level of our family, our community, and maybe our religion, but not so much at the abstract level of our nation. And then there's the trust question. When the government asks you to give up something that's culturally precious, the natural response isn't going to be a cue. It's a question about whether that is going to go to the right place. And honestly, that's a fair question to ask. But here's where things are different. India in 2026 is not Korea in 1997. Korea's problem was different. Their biggest companies imploded and their entire economy fell with them. India's problem is different. We import nearly 90% of our oil. With the conflict in West Asia pushing oil prices up, our import bill has exploded. And we spent over $70 billion on gold imports last year alone. Oil and gold together make up more than 50% of our total imports. Now that puts real pressure on the rupee. Not because our economy is broken, but because geopolitical shock hit us at the worst possible angle. So here's the math. India imports between 7 and 800 tons of gold every year. If the demand for that gold falls by just 20%, a modest reduction, that's $14 billion that doesn't drain our reserves and doesn't pressure the rupee. In comparison, Korea's gold collecting campaign raised $2.1 billion worth of gold, and that was called a national miracle. And then this week, something happened. A new survey came out where 61% of respondents said that they would either delay or completely avoid their purchase of gold for the next 12 months. Jewelry stocks fell almost 10% in a single trading session. Not because of any government regulation, but rather because of a voluntary signal from ordinary consumers. The government followed this up by raising the import duty on gold from 6% to 15%. Will all of this stick? Probably not. Some of it will fade, but the signal is being sent. We don't need a miracle. We need a deferral. The question for us isn't if we have the same collectivism that Korea did in 1998. The question is much simpler. Do you understand that your decision, combined with that of millions of others, can add up to something big and real? Gold isn't going anywhere. The moment the rupee stabilizes, the demand for gold always returns. So you're not giving anything up, but rather you're deferring. The Koreans melted their gold jewelry and called it a miracle. We're being asked not to buy some for a year. That's not a sacrifice, that's a choice. We started this video with a grandmother placing her ring on a counter in Seoul. I said it was about economics, but it wasn't. It's about collective action. What a whole country is willing to do to pull themselves out of a crisis. They ran a simple calculation. If enough people do nothing, the outcome is far worse for everyone, including themselves. You might think that your one decision isn't really going to make a big impact. And that's true in isolation. But that's exactly what collective action problems look like from the inside. Everyone is waiting for someone else to go first, and then nothing happens. That grandmother didn't know if her ring would matter, but she didn't want to be the reason that it didn't. This same logic applies here, and the cost is lower. If you want help thinking about what this means for your money, that's what Fabits is here for. There's a link in the description below. Please reach out. My name is Adeep. See you in the next one.